All right, welcome everybody. I see people coming through the front door here. We'll let them get settled and start momentarily. Erin, is Virginia on? I see her there. Wonderful. So we have a jam-packed day for you guys with our Indigenous food systems community of practice. I will let you know up front that this session is being recorded. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, same thing. Add them in the chat. You're welcome to leave your camera on or off, whatever makes you feel comfortable, and hope you enjoy the next hour we have. I'm going to pass it over to Virginia, and she can share a little bit about what we've done in the last year or so.
Thank you so much, Richard. I am very happy to be here and really great to see so many of you that I haven't seen in a long time and see lots of new faces as well. I'm Virginia Clark. I'm the Executive Director of SAFSF, and I am also a very fortunate participant in this first community of practice in Indigenous food systems. And I'm not going to go into great detail about what we did and what we didn't, because some of the funders, as well as our partners from Melvin Consulting and at First Nations, are going to really lead that. But I just want to kind of give a little bit of background. And one of the things that is really gratifying for me is that over the course of the last 12, 15 years, is that SAFSF and First Nations Development Institute have built up a partnership, a friendship, kind of a learning lab, as we at SAFSF, and I will speak from personal experience, myself have really learned how to engage with Indian country, engage with partners that with whom I was not necessarily familiar, and to ask questions and have that be okay. This community practice is really an outgrowth of those relationships over the years, and kind of long, sometimes challenging conversations, yet we've been working towards kind of a shared vision for how we might combine our skill sets as organizations and our staff and networks to create something really valuable for the broader philanthropic community. So First Nations, we've had a series of kind of partnerships. So First Nations and SAFSF have worked together for many years. Melvin Consulting and First Nations have worked together for many years. And Melvin Consulting, who came in to really lead this work, has decades of frontline experience partnering with individuals and foundations as they develop philanthropic goals, strategies, and they're really particularly gifted at creating spaces that contribute to building relationship and networks and facilitating the really critical conversations that needed to be had. So the three organizations, SAFSF, First Nations, and Melvin Consulting, have been working together for the last, and now with the pandemic years, things got really got sideways, but for the last year plus in delivering this community of practice and hosting it. And I'm really grateful that this call represents the closing out of this particular community of practice. But I know that there is much more that we're going to be doing together. And that is really gratifying. And it is nice to see these people who have become friends and organizations that we have gotten to know through this relationship represented on this call. So with that, I believe I'm turning it over to Eileen and Daryl. Maybe back to you, Richard.
Yes, Eileen and Daryl, take it away.
Thank you all. Thank you, Virginia, for that. Hi, I'm Daryl Melvin, and it's a pleasure to be with you all here today. And Eileen and I are both consultants working with Melvin Consulting. Melvin Consulting is a Native-led and founded firm. And so it's a pleasure working with our partners. One of the things that we've been working on, and I'm going to just do a little bit of level setting and share with you some of the framework for developing this work that we're doing with our partners. It's that we have recognized SAFSF as well as First Nations Development Institute recognize this historic underinvestment in Native communities, whether it's American Indian, Alaska Native, or Native Hawaiian initiatives, people and communities, in this case, particularly in the food systems arena. You know, when we talk about our Indigenous communities, we recognize that Native people have this deep connection with lands. We have relationships that we value, not just with our nuclear families, but these extended relationships that also includes how we interact with the natural world, with living beings as stewards and caretakers of these areas and these natural places. And one of the things that we wanted to also identify and really promote is that we have many Native people that have professional backgrounds that are very, very talented in Indian communities and Native communities, and that there's this misperception that there's a lack of Native talent. And so we wanted to make sure that we share with individuals that who have to just look into these Native communities, that these individuals are working with their local communities, their people, on providing a wealth of solutions, ideas, thoughts, and really carrying forward some of the cultural teachings and traditions within those communities. And recognizing also that despite a history of removal of Indian people, Native people from traditional lands, removal from culture, it's important that we recognize and share the work that they are all doing. And so we welcome you today in support of the initiatives that Virginia had talked about and where we want to go. And so I want to share with you a little bit about the approach and the philosophy that we use in developing this program. My business partner, Eileen Egan, will also talk a little bit about it some more. So we wanted to make sure that as we approach the work with our partners, that we focus really on a value-based learning experience from Native communities. And when we talk about the food systems, and that became important so that we can, again, share the talents in our communities. We also made sure that we included a Native team to really privilege Native voices, not just for the individuals putting together a development plan on how we approach the work, but really about highlighting the Native voices, the speakers, the organizations, and the experiences that they bring to the table. We also wanted to embrace new ways of how we can share information, really learning and embracing Indigenous storytelling as a new way of sharing knowledge. And so I would like to turn it over to my partner, Eileen, and she'll go over a little bit more on how we move forward with this project.
Great, thank you, Daryl. Could you move to, I think, the community? Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Eileen Egan, and I'm a member of the Hopi tribe, and I'm a partner at Melvin Consulting. I was one of the facilitators, and I worked with this amazing project team at SAFSF and First Nations Development Institute to develop this community of practice. So that was a really important part of kind of our approach, really. We decided we wanted this to be a community of practice. And a community of practice has 4 elements: self-selected group, intentional learning, common concern and passion for a topic, and interacting regularly. So this group actually is self-selected. So First Nations and SAFSF put out a call for applications, and our group of 13 folks kind of put their hands up and said, yes, I want to be part of this. I'm going to apply. I'm going to share more about why this is important to me. And they were invited to be part of this community of practice. Intentional learning. So for that piece, we had a 10-month program. We had 10 sessions, which culminated in an in-person session at the SAFSF forum, where participants spent, of course, they went to the forum, and then they spent an extra day or so with a team in the local area and the project team. A common concern and passion for a topic. Everyone was really interested in how can I increase investments and make connections in Native communities, and then interacting regularly. Like I said, we had 10 sessions, they were 3 hours each, and they were quite an immersion. Next slide, please. So this community of practice, when the project team started out, and I just want to recognize Ade Romero Briones is on the call today, and she is a really instrumental in developing the curriculum for this program. So Ade, when I'm done with my slides, I might ask you if you want to say a few words. So when we started this, Ade and Richard Elmhill and SAFSF staff and Melvin Consulting, we came up with kind of 4 core areas that we wanted to focus on for this program and this community of practice. One was community connections. So we wanted to highlight as many Native practitioners as we could in this program. So we had many speakers and panels throughout this community of practice and in each session. Of course, we wanted to increase investments. And actually, we have some preliminary information and results from increasing financial investments. And one is, we did a pre and post survey. And so in 2020, the participants self-reported about $6.5 million in investments. And then in 2022, year to date, self-reported $11.6 million in investments. So we almost doubled the amount of investments from the pre and post this community of practice. Another important outcome was increasing the funder network. So we wanted to ensure that people who participate in this community of practice felt like they had a network that they could rely on, either to help think about what strategy can I use to to influence my institution or my organization, or if I wanted to maybe put together a group of funders to support an initiative, who could I reach out to? And of course, our greatest hope is that this community of practice and the participants, and you'll get to meet a lot of them on the panel coming up right after this, that they feel like they can rely on each other, but also rely on us. So we built really strong connections and relationships through this program. And so we will be available to this community of practice as well, the project team, as also part of their kind of network of support. And then finally, allyship and advocacy was important. So how we wanted to explore, how can you be a good relative to Native communities? So we had really throughout the entire program really focused on that. So feeling like I can be a good advocate and internally within my organization and then externally. Next slide, please. I also wanted to give you a sense of what a session kind of was like. Like I said, it was online, and because of the pandemic, it was all the sessions were 3 hours and they were online. And in the future, maybe it would be something different, but we worked with what we had. In a typical session, we would assign pre-session reading, and Erin from SAFSF put together a great site for the whole team where we could go and find all of these materials that we would be using. So one example is we had a session on narrative change in First Nations reclaiming Native truth. So you can see that's just one example of what might be in our resource and readings. We wanted to connect as a cohort, so we would often go into breakout rooms. So one example is like, what does it mean to be a good relative? So we would have small groups and have conversations like that. We would always have a project spotlight, and it doesn't say it here, but this is Nephi Craig, and he's from the White Mountain Apache tribe. And he had a session on, and he's a chef, and he had a session on healing through harvesting. It really is phenomenal. So we had between 1 and 5 guests at any given session, and they shared their stories. And I have to say, this really was all about storytelling. And then peer learning was an important element of every session. So this is an example of, you can see a map. We actually did a mapping exercise, and small groups actually did work on their own, and each were assigned a section of a map or a region. and they were able to identify organizations to support, and kind of we walk kind of through a little bit of a vetting process, like native led and native controlled and things like that. And then we continued our conversations on that. And then we always had time for reflections with the project team. So one example is sometimes we would have something called Ask Us Anything. And participants could literally ask us anything. And it was a safe space, it wasn't recorded. It was just a safe space where we could have conversations. Yeah, so I just wanted to share a little bit about kind of what the sessions were like. And then I know we're gonna go have a panel, and Aday, I just didn't know if you wanted to add anything to the sessions, any comments right now, and then I'm gonna turn it over to Richard.
No, it's great. Thank you, Eileen.
Wonderful. Thanks, Eileen and Daryl, for walking us through just the thinking and the thought process. There's a lot that's happening behind the scenes. We lead on Melvin Consulting to organize this community of practice and a few other ones that First Nations is involved with. One of the things I like to share is that, you know, we're working with funders here. We also work with Native nonprofits and leaders who are in a grant writing space, and it kind of fits both ends of what we see as the problem of getting more funds into Indian country and familiar with organizations. So next slide, we're going to move into the funder panel, so you can get a chance to hear about you know, some of the experiences that happened. I think we got lucky in the way of we had funders from all levels and from different parts. So we had some foundations, some private funding, some government funding, and so it was really great to see how, you know, depending on where folks were positioned, how they approached getting to know Native communities. So I'm going to go around the room with our community of practice. If you just want to introduce yourself, let us know briefly who you are, what organization you're with, and your experience level in funding. And we'll start with Mr. Greg.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I'm Greg Horner. I'm a program officer with the Cedar Tree Foundation, longtime SAFSF supporter, fan, previous board member, whatever they called it, steering committee. And let's see, I'm based in Boston. I'm also an independent consultant, so I sort of split my time between two hats. And coming into this community of practice, I would say I had a medium amount of funding experience in Indian country.
Thanks, Greg. Let's go with Mary.
Hi, everybody. Mary Davis. I'm the director of the Healthy Food Focus Area at Blue Cross Blue Shield North Carolina Foundation. We're a statewide funder. So our goal is to ensure that everyone living in North Carolina has access to healthy food through an equitable food systems approach. So prior to becoming part of the community of practice, we had just started funding our tribal nations and urban Indian organizations in North Carolina, and that was a result of COVID. So we had done one round of funding to almost every tribe and urban Indian organization in the state, and that really was why we wanted to join the community of practice, because we knew we wanted to do more.
Thanks, Mary. Ellen?
Hi, I'm Ellen Waddell, president of the Avila Fund in San Diego. And I actually had very little experience in funding in this community. I, had sort of funded one organization through an intermediary. And so my goal was really how to even begin this process, how to feel more comfortable funding, how to find organizations to fund, and how to sort of build up a group of fellow funders that I could sort of call on and collaborate with.
Excellent. Andrea?
Hi, everyone. Andrea Alma here. I work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture on Farm to School. I'm a regional farm to school specialist based in Denver, and I work with partners across 8 states to help connect kids with fresh local food and get more of that great local food into school meals. And my experience coming into this was working with a number of grantees receiving funds from us in the 8 states that I work with, which cover a number of reservations and federally recognized tribes. And so I've worked with some tribal grantees and really was looking for ways to make our grant program more responsive to the needs in Indian country.
Mhm. Thank you. Siobhan?
Hi, everyone. Siobhan Evans. I'm the Director of Programs and Movement Support at the Food and Farm Communications Fund. We fund the strategic comms and movement support work of food and farm organizations. And before coming into this community of practice, I would say that we had a small percentage of our funds that were directed each year to Indigenous communities. I came into the fund new to philanthropy, so it was also a new experience for me. So small percentage, and just understood that there was a lot more that we could be doing.
Great. Yeah, we met every month for 9 months, and we got to meet in person, like Eileen mentioned, which was another chance for us to just get to know each other on a more personal level. Part of the planning we did was really thinking about how this space challenged us personally, but also professionally. So first question to Greg is along those lines. What did you learn both on the personal and professional side?
Yeah, happy to have the chance to reflect a little bit for everyone's benefit. It was a lot of commitment, of course, over time. Looking out months, and 3-hour Zooms can be long. I have 3 takeaways I wanted to share. First off, we're all super busy with our jobs and lives. It can be hard to dedicate time to deep learning. So by signing up to join this group with a really structured approach over time, it was just a great opportunity for structured collective learning over time, and enabled us to, because it was a structured building curriculum, it enabled us to go deeper than we would with just a series of sort of one-offs. Second, this experience really helped push me to not think about Indigenous populations as a monolith. Each session was a reminder of the diversity and variety across the 573 sovereign nations in the US. Third, and this goes back to some of the framing work that was talked about a few minutes ago, we often hear a lot about the problems in Indian country, and I accept and recognize, and it's valuable to note and know about poverty levels and health issues and public misperceptions about Indigenous nations. And without downplaying those, I think it's also really valuable to have the opportunity to have like an abundance framing where we recognize and celebrate the strengths of Indigenous communities.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, I know we got to unpack that quite a bit from different angles. I think there's a big aha as you realize how diverse of groupings in, like you mentioned, over 500 nations. And then we boiled that down and said, well, there's also all these nonprofit groups, and there's also schools, and there's also all these entities that may be eligible for funding. Mary, we had talked a little bit about memorable experiences, and I feel like our group had created some, we uncovered some. Is there anything that sticks out to you from the community of practice that's particularly memorable?
Absolutely. As you would imagine, so as Greg said, we were on a lot of Zooms, and we all got that Zoom fatigue, I will say, but then we all got to get together. So at the annual conference, as Eileen mentioned, there were these site visits that we were able to do, and time that we were able to spend together. And it was extremely powerful. Of course, we're coming out of COVID, so everything felt powerful. It was the first thing that I had done in person. So meeting the buddies, all of the buddies in the community of practice felt really good, like to really solidify those relationships and to have people to kind of process the information. The Zooms were very packed, so there wasn't a lot of time for sense making. And so we finally had some space for that, and that felt good. And not only like meeting the buddies, but all the facilitators, right? So we had this lovely access to all the facilitators to break bread with them, to talk with them, to laugh with them, to get to know them personally. And that just really, it felt terrific. And then exploring, you know, the food sovereignty efforts in tribal communities. So we, you know, took a big bus and went around and explored those and saw what was really happening on the ground. And, you know, there's nothing like a site visit, right? And seeing the work firsthand, it all becomes real. Everything you've been feeling and you've been learning, it all becomes real. And the incredible work that's happening on the ground, which I could talk about forever and show pictures, but that's like a whole nother Zoom call, I think. But then I'll say the other thing was having that uninterrupted time with Mike, who works with Richard at First Nations Development Institute. Are those all the right words? I think for all the right words. So we, you know, we thought we were going to be doing more funding in this area, and we just really are like, we're doing it. We just started stepping into it. And, you know, not everything is, it was like it was a little messy. You know, not everybody was happy with us, with our approach, with how we were doing it, which, you know, as a funder, it makes you scared because I mean, well, I'll speak for myself, you know, you're supposed to have it all buttoned up and you have the strategy document, you have the approach document, you put it all out there, but then, you know, reality happens. We've never funded in this community before, not in this kind of way. And to have that time with Mike on the bus to really like, oh gosh, this is happening and this is going wrong. And I don't know about this. And just to really have an honest conversation. And just to hear from him like, yeah, it's okay. It's normal. Yeah, that's okay. That's good. You're doing a great, you know, that's a great job. Maybe think about this, maybe think about that. That was extremely powerful. So I guess I would say, you know, there's like some fear about doing things for the first time, and our investments were going to be large. We had decided on a 4-year, $400,000 investment in every tribal nation in North Carolina, and every urban Indian organization, and one Native-led nonprofit that is, you know, not a state recognized tribe. So we were going all in. And it felt when people weren't happy, not everyone, well, some people happy, some people not happy, that felt scary. And Mike made it feel less scary. So I'll share that. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Mary. Yes, I think for Blue Cross Blue Shield, from what I observed from the outside, just the timing of the community of practice being against the timing of needing to get lots of funds out was really, it was great to see all the planning, and you guys came in as a pair as well. So having more people to bounce these ideas off, I mean, really showed well in what you guys brought. Ellen, will you share a little bit about just working amongst a peer group? I know we opened up to a lot of different databases and mapping. You know, what did you find most helpful there?
Yeah, great. Well, as Eileen mentioned, we did all collaborate on a mapping project. So we were divided into smaller groups and tasked with identifying 5 to 10 different nonprofits or tribal programs and other emerging initiatives by region that were working in sort of food sustainability and food systems. And our goal was really to provide like 75 to 150 fundable projects in each region. So for me, again, as I said, I had done very little in this area. And so part of the project was we had access and were provided 3 different databases. First Nations has one, Candid has one. And then we also had the list of federally recognized federal and state tribes. And so we sort of had the resources, and then we worked in small groups. And so together we sort of could collaborate and support each other. And I will say it was great. I mean, I found an amazing organization in my backyard I had no idea about, who I'm now currently funding. So I think it was an opportunity for us to sort of work together, support each other, get to know each other better, and to build up this map and database of future opportunities for all of us. So yeah, that was a great project. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, when we kind of unfolded that part of it, we did a lot of learning where it may not be in your region, it may be in your region, and just to know something that may be in Alaska or maybe in California when you're on the East Coast brings in all this learning that you might not bump into if you're kind of focused maybe just in your funding region. All this kind of side-by-side learning, if you will. Andrea, you mentioned you are with the USDA program, so you're in kind of the federal funding space. What were some key takeaways for you?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. The federal government has, a certain approach to funding, and it's very top down, it's very rigid, it's very egalitarian in a sense, and it's not always responsive to the needs of unique communities or very open to change. However, through this community of practice, it was so lovely to rub elbows with non-federal funders who perhaps weren't thinking about the same constraints that I face every day. And in spite of the rigidity of the federal government funding space, this community of practice helped me find ways to make changes, make tangible changes, but also the federal government is made up of people who work there. So what I really got out of this community of practice was tangible ways to communicate with my peers to help bring them along on this journey of getting to a space where we can be as responsive as absolutely possible, again, to the needs of Indigenous stakeholders. So just as a very brief example, we learned about a special tribal nonprofit status called a 7871 organization. So we clarified in our grant request for application that those entities are indeed eligible for our grant program. We called out certain intersectional issues that may not have been mentioned in our Farm to School grant program as eligible activities that resonate with the types of language that I was hearing on this community of practice about the ways that tribes are working on food systems and food sovereignty in their areas. And so again, just having this really great reminder every month of the importance of listening to stories and to doing everything we possibly can to be responsive to Indian country's needs really helped me kind of energize me for working within, again, a very, very rigid government-y space. Thanks,
Andrea. It's great to see how that kind of ripple effect, even with this large staff on the federal side, can have an impact and make some waves. Siobhan, this community of practice as a newer funder, what made it welcoming for you?
Yeah, for me, it definitely resonated when we used to refer to our space together as almost like a living room. So we would sometimes say on the calls, like, you're in the living room, like, get comfortable. So it just felt in many ways just like that, like a safe, comfortable space that even though we were having, challenging conversations or talking about sometimes difficult topics or subjects, that it was a very welcoming, safe space for us to learn and to grow together. So I definitely appreciated being in community with folks to have those moments together. And it always feels really important to me. I think about oftentimes shared learning being the catalyst or the thing that can help us to lead to shared work together and then shared action. And that's what I felt like we were really able to get out of our time together as the collaborative. So that just felt really great to be in community with folks doing similar work. And then the last thing I'll say that really stood out to me, I definitely think a lot about, doing strategic communications work, like who controls the narrative and how important it is for community control over our own stories and our own narratives. And I felt like this space was really controlled and led by and beautifully cultivated by Indigenous communities. So to have like, the facilitators, the speakers, the folks who were leading these calls be the primary folks within the communities and being able to tell their own stories and to share with us, that just felt really special for me as well.
Yeah, likewise. I think having this group during the pandemic, and I saw this outside of this group, other communities who met regularly online had another level of support, and then we turned it around, kind of facing it towards Native communities in our line work really helped in terms of going through the pandemic as a group and putting our best foot forward into what we had available. We have a little bit more time to go around, and I know our work as we're ending our community of practice year one has really turned into how can we make this a larger conversation? How can we invite more people to support Native communities? So if you just want to offer a word of advice to the SAFSF group we have on the call, that would be lovely. Maybe we'll start at the top again with Greg.
Sure. I would say in a little moment of sort of self-critique, my instinct when I was sort of on the cusp of trying to fund our first sort of partnerships, investments, whatever you want to call them, with Native nonprofits, was that this was a whole different beast, and I needed to really do all this research to understand the whole landscape and all the issues. And I didn't decide to do that PhD or doctoral program. It would take such a long time. I started learning to really understand everything. And the advice it may have been from Mike Roberts was just to start somewhere. Just start, learn along the way. Don't do the whole paralysis by analysis that I'm really good at. So I'll leave it at that.
Right, that's what I was gonna say. So just do it. And then, so just like Greg said, and the other thing is, and COVID helped us just do it. There were some silver linings there, right? So just do it. And the other thing is, we learned through this community practice was the importance of self-determination, self-determined work, and supporting self-determined work when you're supporting Indigenous communities. And so when we started, we were going to do a food sovereignty initiative with Indigenous communities. And then, we started funding folks and talking to folks, and it was like, our tribal grounds are falling to pieces. We need bathrooms so we can have a powwow. We need to support our camp so we can preserve our language. There was a very core kind of infrastructure needs that needed to be supported. So we changed course, and our grant is really, the grant that we made available is about infrastructure and capacity needs, and really meeting folks where they are, whatever they may be, actually. So I'll leave it with that.
And I'll jump in as well with somewhat of a counterbalance in a sense, but to some degree, it does take time to learn and appreciate, as Greg had said at the onset, the diversity of strengths and cultures and value sets and wonderful elements of the diversity of Indian nations that are out there. And it's worth it, to make that time and to take that time. And we had the great fortune of having a structured community where we could do that. But I would encourage you to put that on your priority list as you're looking at the next fiscal year or at the calendar year 2023 for your organizations, if this is an area you're looking to expand into.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think it's an exciting space to be in. And I think just be your authentic self. And I think this is another another Mike Roberts thing, but if things get comfortable or messy, don't give up, just work it through and just, this is important work and it needs to be supported. And I think we can develop relationships and collaborate and work together. So I would just say, be your authentic self and just keep going.
And I would just add, think about the long term as well. I definitely ditto the piece on reflect on what you have done as a grant maker, but also just think about what are the actions you can do now? And then think about what are the actions that I can continue from this so that it's not like a one and done sort of thing, so that we are cultivating the relationships that we need to have long term so that we can support the needs on the ground over time.
Yes, that's a good one. Keeping your head up in the long-term thinking. Thank you guys so much for sharing and taking the time to share your experience over the last over a year, and kudos to you for putting in all that time as well. So that's a good overview crash course of what the program was. We are still gauging interest, from SAFSF side. If there's anyone interested in being a part of something like this, we're curious if you're interested. Please add your name to the chat, and we can let you know if we're going to do a round 2. When I look around, I don't see a lot of opportunities like this, so it was very exciting to be part of the first cohort. It went extremely successful, both in extending our funding, but also creating lasting and good relationships where we can pick up the phone and just be honest with each other. So I've seen that happen throughout. So hopefully we added enough to spark a conversation. We're going to open up a few breakout rooms. There'll be someone from the community of practice just to get the conversation started. So if you're curious about anything, have any specific questions, ask them in there. If not, we want to explore 2 questions with you. The first one, how are you funding or hoping to fund Native communities? Aaron, if you want to throw it on the screen just so we can see a little bit. And then the second question, what do you or your organization need to do to have strong partnerships with Native nations, Native-led organizations, or peer organizations? So feel free to explore one or both of those questions. And I'll just ask the lead, the community of practice member, or if you're on the project team leading, just identify yourself and get the conversation going. We will be in breakout rooms, Aaron, for a shortened time.
Yes, about 12 minutes.
Okay, wonderful. We'll see you all when you get back.
Hi, I'm sorry, could you switch me to a different breakout room?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask. You're not showing up as unassigned for some reason, but
Thank you. Yeah, Jacob Israelau and I, he's a member of the family that the foundation I work for, so it doesn't quite make sense for us to be in the same
Oh,
breakout.
gotcha. Yep, absolutely. Let me just put you in a different room. Okay. There you go.
A hydroponic company, and so we're looking at creative ways of building hydroponics into native food systems.
Nice.
So what we're doing, I am the financial advisor and family member of the Sandy River Charitable Foundation. We are working through grants and PRIs. We have a PRI to the Lakota Fund and are currently discussing to get Native Americans on ranches. We are currently discussing a grant because of the drought. Because we're a Maine-based foundation, Nate has done I have done a lot of work with getting us into the Lakota Fund. Nate my brother who runs the foundation has been working with the Penobscot in Maine. And so we now have grants and PRIs. These PRIs are significant. It's $1 million to each one, into economic development. And, it forms the basis of how do we help people help themselves. In Vermont, we are actually funding an Abenaki activist who is chief of his tribe, but is also working for all Abenaki in the state, and he has a 5-year grant. And then we're also have initiated funding to start the Black Farmers Fund, which also includes Native Americans. And we are working with Mark Watson and Conda to get pot liquor off the ground, pot liquor is exploding, and that also will be primarily Blacks, but will include Native Americans. So that's kind of those are our biggest projects in Native American land right now.
Oh,
Right. Sorry, I missed it. I had a technical difficulty for a minute, so Deborah, I only caught the end of it about the work you're doing on the hydroponic direction. I would love to know more, but I'll catch up later. Where I've been working is on the regional aspects. I've been part of this community practice. I totally recommend it because of everything you just heard. And also then, but with my current work, there's been a lot of efforts where I deal now on some global basis with the Agroecology Fund and Global Alliance for the Future of Food to unite some of these indigenous communities in different areas of the globe together, and because they face similar problems. So actually the pattern of need is very similar, and then helping to attract investing to them. So Mark Watson's on our steering committee, and as one.
Well, of course.
Yeah, he's everywhere. Mike Roberts has also recently joined our steering committee, and which is great. That's a transformational investing in food systems initiative. Specifically to grant and investment allocations, I've made some investments into some Indigenous-led CDFIs, have more planned, and also working at the standard, trying to deal with some of the next steps with Indigenous communities on how to involve traditional ecological knowledge and without, for lack of a better term, the metrics sets that are there, and incorporate them into the next level of financial reporting, so that because there's a lot of what gets measured gets managed, and there's a lot of efforts that are measured wrong, and then there are other areas of our needs that don't even have measurements, in the area of social capital, where everybody knows it's very important, but they don't know how to measure it. and trying to see how to bring in some of the traditional ecological directions to at least fill the gaps and have that conversation. So starting to get into the trust aspects, the relationship aspects, the nature aspects, to incorporate them into really unlock large amounts of capital with that knowledge as an underpin. It also gets into some of the...
We don't require specific reporting to them because our attitude is they know better what needs to be done than we do.
Yep.
And so we are obviously in discussions, but it took 4 years to get the money into the main group because they were working out exactly how they were going to use it and how it would be placed based on their formatting. And the same thing with the Lakota Fund. When I called the Lakota Fund and I talked to Tawny, you know, it was, well, what's it going to cost us and what are you going to require? You know, that discussion. And we simply said, we're not requiring anything. What needs to get done? And so the key factor that we've discovered is to have that discussion on what is absolutely needed that you need right now, and like back out of us telling them how to do it and let them tell us how they would do it. And then if we see gaps, you know, as the process goes on, you develop a relationship. So that we're very careful not to impose, you know, Western metrics. You know, when they call and they say, well, what is required in the report? Our answer is, well, what do you think is needed in the report?
That's the exact same direction, Kathy. It's that it's not to impose, it's to learn.
Exactly.
And
we constantly say that, you know, like Chief Stevens here in Vermont said, well, what do you guys want? We want you to be Abenaki. You know, what we want to learn from you, and we want you all to thrive.
Yeah.
Now, but we don't know how to do that because we're not Abenaki. I mean, I have an advantage. I was married to a Native American elder for 10 years and then he walked on. So I have a somewhat intuitive level of understanding. But, you know, if you slide into organization, I mean, Tim and I have crossed paths before. It's very easy to go right into like what I've been trained in, you know. Even though I've always been in the alternative investing world, there's still structures that, you know, you kind of slap yourself up the side of the head and just say, shut up and learn.
That's exciting to hear. But that certainly isn't the kind of standard operating practice for funders in the greater world.
Well, our foundation is not. Nate is a computer engineer, and there is nothing standard about the way we run.
I really appreciate hearing the reflections, and I'm so bad with names. Erin, help me out. The woman who just spoke up from USDA. Andrea, yes, thank you. I think I've got to go get tested for dyslexia at almost 60. It'd be wonderful to know if I actually have it. Think outside the box, I'm there. And that's one of those issues. But with what Andrea said, what I find very powerful is those just learning. Oh, there's this whole other aspect besides 501c3s that can receive charitable donations. Let's change the rules. And now there's potential for a lot of other capital to head towards tribal interests that were cut out because they weren't 501c3 the way that was defined from the West.
Right.
That's the spark. And what I hope with bringing in TEK knowledge to the metric set is then to show, oh, this is a way to measure it that we haven't figured out how. Now we have standardized aspects that can unlock more capital to go that way. That's the hope.
Right. And the other thing is that if anyone wants to talk to Nate, you know, about the way he processed, a lot of the way Nate is our executive, he is chief cook, bottle washer. And so a lot of a lot of
You're muted, Richard.
Wonderful. Thanks, Aaron. Welcome back. That was a quick breakout room. We got to the second question and we were like, it's a deep question to cover in 30 seconds here. Hopefully you had a little time though to pull the thread and get a conversation started. Maybe something you can take back home. Is there anyone that wanted to just share out briefly anything that stood out to you from the conversation? In our group, there was we had talked about border communities. So Indigenous communities that go over from the United States into Canada, how they look at their territories and their land as one, but are often split in between working inside of the US or Canadian government, or the different rules of funding those entities that exist there. It's one area that in our community of practice, we probably could talk about a little bit more. But I think it pointed to show that depending on where folks are located, it's something that there are always incorporating into their thinking on how to best have access to resources, create relationships, and the complexities that arise really quickly. So that was one thing that was discussed there. If you have anything that stuck out to you, please add it to the chat. I will close this out here because we're coming up on the hour. So thank you again for spending a little bit of time with us, just to see what happened, behind the scenes of our community of practice. It was a wonderful experience for First Nations to put into play something that has been in idea form between Mike and Virginia. They spent a lot of hours and nights, I'm sure, talking about what this would look like in real life. And as a program person for First Nations, I was really honored to spend good time, thinking with you and sharing from our perspective. So I wanted to thank Melvin Consulting and Eileen and Daryl for putting their hearts into this work. I want to thank the SAFSF team, Virginia, Renee, Susie, Aaron, Bridget, for doing all things planning wise to support the group and really bringing in the members who made this thing happen. And all the members, I know our work continues, so we'll see you soon. If you're interested, just stay tuned. I'm sure there'll be another opportunity here to support tribal communities, to get to know one another, and share our good work. So with that, we'll say farewell. And yeah, we'll see you next time.